Bharat Shah at ASK. Dr. Subir Gokarn, Director of Research Brookings India and former Deputy Governor at the Reserve Bank of India, is joining us right now. Dr. Gokarn, thanks very much for your time, sir. Apologies to be coming to you late. Thanks for waiting. So we have exit poll results. So I don't need to repeat that. I trust that you obviously are aware of those. I just like to ask you, generally speaking, these exit poll results seem to be much better and ahead of what you and I and others in the financial markets have been sort of speculating and talking about. Would you agree with that?
Well, I can't recall ever having speculated on exit polls, so perhaps other people have. But I don't see why we can't just wait for the next 3 days until we have a final set of results. Obviously, there is a fair amount of relief and comfort being drawn from the prospect of a stable government with a reasonable majority, and if that's what the outcome is, then I think that bodes well for at least the prospects of the economic challenges that the country is facing being addressed with some degree of coherence and commitment, and that's what we can wait and watch for.
Right. Okay, fair enough. So I think nobody doubts. So let's assume that the exit polls are right. For the purpose of this discussion, Mr. Modi forms the government. He's the Prime Minister, and I don't think anybody doubts his sort of development agenda, which he's sort of campaigned on the basis of extensively. Nobody sort of doubts any of that. But at some point, all of those efforts are going to meet the economic reality that we face ourselves in. Very low growth, still very high inflation, right? So when that happens, what's your sense in terms of the time it is going to take before?
This is Anindya Chakravarti from the Delhi studio.
I think we've got to be...
Yeah, sorry, we just lost our line to Mumbai. That's why I'm going to... if you've heard Prashant's question, you could go ahead and answer that.
Yeah. Yes, I heard the question. I think we should be, cautious in expecting any quick results from any decisions. Most of the problems that we have to deal with are essentially very deeply structural kinds of problems, and they require strategic responses. They require elaborate and well-designed responses. Now, obviously, there are blueprints available. Many people have talked about these, have put them. There are committee reports that are at least there for consideration. So I think what we need to see immediately is commitment. What we need to see immediately is an announcement or a set of announcements that relate to the kinds of solutions that the government is contemplating for each significant problem, and then starting to get those in motion with very explicit milestones. Solutions won't happen overnight, the outcomes won't be achieved overnight, but I think the comfort comes from the process being incredibly underway. And I think that's really the first...
Mr. Gokarn, you started out by saying that...
small things which you can achieve with a little bit of a twist here or there.
Mr. Gokarn, you started out by saying that a stable government is going to be good for the economy. And I'd just like you to elaborate on that, because the UPA was relatively stable as well. The Congress had more than 200 seats. It had allies who were not going to leave. It had support from both Mayawati and Samajwadi Party. It was a stable government. What was wrong within that government which made it unstable?
Yeah. No, I don't think it was a question of stability. I think it was a question of the economy having hit certain brick walls, and this is typical of the development process. You solve a set of problems, you achieve healthy growth, rapid growth for some period of time, and then you hit another set of problems, and it's really the responsibility of government to continue to solve these problems, remove these bottlenecks, these barriers to growth. What stability does is at least, or the kind of majority that at least the exit polls are visualizing, what it does is to add some level of credence to the government's ability to carry out these changes, assuming that they have identified the right problems. They've diagnosed the situation correctly, and they have the right solutions. So once you have that, this combination of stability and the right blueprint, I think, is really what makes the difference.
So I'll start with the 3 key problems that the new government needs to diagnose first. What would they be according to you?
I've said this often, including on your channel repeatedly. My 3 big issues: food. We have to reorient agriculture to be producing more of what people are eating, which means completely changing, revamping the whole procurement system. I've elaborated on this elsewhere, so I won't go into that. But that is going to help bring food inflation down. That is going to help or create space for monetary policy to start providing some stimulus. That's number 1. Number 2 is infrastructure. We have a basically broken PPP, public-private partnership framework. We need to find ways of repairing this. We need to find ways of getting critical projects back on fast track. And this may involve both more government funds, more public funds, and different organizational structures. So I think that's very important. But we have to make sure that we prioritize these. We can't just be rushing into trying to fix all of the problems at once. And third is the jobs issue, which the campaign has been referring a lot to. We have a major jobs challenge on our hands, whether it is how the jobs are created, how people are skilled, trained for these jobs, how they're sustained. All of these, I think, are huge priorities. This combined set of issues is a huge priority, which means perhaps including labor market reforms and welfare, safety nets. So these are the 3 big issues by my reckoning. I'm sure other people will have their own, but I think some focus on these priorities has to be very quickly articulated by the new government.
So inflation is not a problem according to you as of now, other than food?
No, inflation is certainly a problem, but the solution, the enduring solution to the inflation problem we have right now is to very quickly get food inflation out of the picture, to get grips with it. That has been what has sustained high inflation for so long. There have been other factors coming and going, but unless we address the agricultural situation, we're not really going to get a grip on the inflation situation.
And I understand you're short of time. You have to go, Mr. Gokarn.
Expectations, I think that's perfectly valid.
I'm saying I understand you have to go, Mr. Gokarn, but very quickly, if you could tell us, you said that you've written about it elsewhere, and you've said about this on your channel again. Just very briefly, what would you change in the procurement system to encourage agriculture?
Well, I think our system is geared towards cereal production. The entire incentive system that the primary incentive that farmers have in this country is to produce cereals, rice and wheat, because they're guaranteed prices and they're guaranteed purchases. That has, I think, deviated farmers away from producing what consumers are actually consuming more and more of, essentially proteins and vegetables. Obviously, there isn't perfect substitutability between the two, but there has to be some way to get the consumer preference reflected in the decision to cultivate, in the crop selection. And I think that requires the government to step back a little bit from this kind of procurement bear hug that they have the agricultural system.
You're saying that the market should give the price signal.
That means redesign, that means dealing with several political challenges, of course.
The market needs to give the price signal.
Absolutely. That has to be the predominant way in which farmers are deciding on what to cultivate. Yeah.
You know, the data about what consumers prefer seems to be debated, because some data shows that even food, protein and vegetable and pulses consumption per capita has gone down, but that could be because, as you're saying, that production has not kept pace. Is there any model in any state that comes close to what you're procuring?
You know, if prices are high, people will consume less. Yeah.
So I'm saying, is there any model in any state? People have been talking about the Gujarat state. Mr. Gulati has spoken about the agricultural revolution, contested, of course, by others on what really happened there in Gujarat. Is there any state where you think that the procurement model has worked?
No, procurement is a national, is a federal process. So that really has to be revamped. Of course, individual states have their own packages, but rice and wheat, the two big procurement crops, are at the national level. But this is not the only thing. We need, apart from that, we need to make investments in rural infrastructure. We need to improve the logistics part of it, the supply chain part of it. So, of course, different states have had different experiences with these issues. And, you know, I can't name a specific state offhand, but I think we have to try and aggregate as much as possible from best practices that these states have demonstrated. But the bottom line, I think the big change which is going to drive this has to come at the national level, and I think that's where the central government's role is critical here.
Investments in rural infrastructure, private or public?
Interestingly, I think our experience overall, not just with not specific to agriculture, but overall, is that public investment is a critical catalytic process. That is, if the government puts money into certain things, it allows private investment to come in and you know, with reasonable expectations of return. So, for example, a highway. This is again not specific to rural, but a highway which is funded by public money actually generates economic opportunities, profit opportunities for private investment along the highway. So it's a combination of the two. The government has to decide where it's going to get the maximum bang for the buck, and allow then private investment to piggyback off that. So I think you can't really.
But that kind of puts a bit of pressure on the fiscal deficit, for instance.
But it also should create space.
But that puts a bit of a pressure on the fisc. Would you come up with some models like Chidambaram had initially come up with, like putting it off the books? Initially, it come up with those models of SPVs, which were not really counted within the.
I don't think anything should be off the books. I don't think anything should be off the books. If you want to spend more money, the government has to spend more money. It has to find new ways of raising money, and there are two clear ways that we have not yet fully exploited. One is we need to bring the GST in. I'm a very ardent advocate of the GST. And two, we have to use the money that we raise from asset sales. Remember, it's not just public enterprises we're talking about. We're talking about mineral rights, we're talking about spectrum, we're talking about land that the government owns, and perhaps some other assets as well. We have to use these creatively. We have to make sure that these are transferred from one set of assets to creating another set of assets. I think these two sources should add substantially to the government's capacity to make investments. I think that's very important.
Okay, Mr. Gokarn, do you have a couple of minutes for us? Because I need to take a break. I have a few more questions for you. If you need to go, I'll ask that right now.
Yes, please ask it right now. I have another call.
So I'm going to ask you the final thing. What would you recommend that the RBI do right now?
I think the RBI basically has announced very categorically that inflation control is its primary objective. Whether it formally announces a target or not is a matter of, you know, a negotiation or collaboration with the government. But having committed to that, having committed to an inflation first or primarily inflation-oriented monetary policy, it needs to respond to the inflation numbers. Which is why I say that the only space that the RBI will get to swing or move towards the growth stimulus will come from a enduring reduction in food inflation. So that is really incumbent on the way in which the government overall responds to the pressures in the agricultural sector. So it's not going to be an immediate overnight change, I think. but it has to get started, and you know, credible beginnings are very, very important in this situation.
Subir Gokarn, thank you for speaking to us. I must apologize again for keeping you waiting. Thank you for giving us your time. We're going to take a very short break. We're back in just a couple of minutes.